How's it going?
It's going really well. It's nice to see you.
It's been a minute.
And I'm very jealous of this outside porch that you were on, I have to
Oh
admit.
yeah.
So.
I moved to Atlanta and got one of those nice southern porches.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I was wondering about that. I was like, is he still in Oakland? Like, what's going on?
I
So
left
tell me a
in
little bit more about what's happening at your role at the Guild. So sorry,
yeah,
we're with Zach Murray from the Guild. Tell us more about your role and what the Guild is.
so I joined the guild in September 2021, and we are a group that's evolving. It started out in the sort of co-working, co-living space.
Right.
In an area of Atlanta called Auburn Avenue, where Dr. King's church is, and the historic hub of Black Atlanta. And it was a space for mostly Black creatives, makers, artisans, culture workers to live, co-work, have experiences together. And that started in 2017. And since that time, we've evolved to take on a larger role in the space of real estate development, focusing on community ownership. And so we generate projects, residential, commercial spaces that are developed to be owned by the local community. And so our first project is one that's getting off the ground this year. The pilot project is called 918 Dill. And it involves us working with a community called Capitol View here in Atlanta to acquire this commercial space that had been vacant for about a decade, and converting that, the ground floor, into community serving retail. So there's going to be a grocery store to help address the food apartheid dynamic that we're experiencing here in South Atlanta. And also a shared workspace for folks in the same line of who the guild has always worked with, creative folks and community folks. And we're building on top of that 18 units of affordable housing in 2 stories on top of the existing ground floor space. And it's going to be what's called, what the guild has developed, is called a community stewardship trust. And so basically the community, the folks in the immediate surrounding area in the zip code, will be able to buy shares on a sliding scale from $10 to $100 a month, and basically buy back the equity, and they'll become investors in the project, and we'll be able to generate some wealth out of ownership. So as the property pays down debt, it'll create and generate returns on the investment for all of our community investors, and eventually it will be 100% community owned. So the CST is a vehicle to enable community control and ownership of the space. And so the guild does the development, and we partner with communities to generate their ownership stake in the properties. And we have a second project where we're working directly with a community organizing faction here in Atlanta, a community organizing group called Community Movement Builders, to acquire space in the community, Pittsburgh, that they've been working and organizing in. And so it might be a different model than the CST, but it's still a property that's going to be owned and run and co-developed with a community group serving community needs. And so the guild is also a co-op. We are converting to worker-owned co-op this year. We're currently in the process of doing that. But yeah, we exist in this sort of space of real estate, anti-displacement, working to address the really rapid gentrification that's happening here in all corners of Atlanta, but specifically focused on the Black communities here in Atlanta in the southwest quadrant of the city.
Thanks for explaining that to me. Before we move on, you said CST. What does CST stand for?
Yep, it's a community stewardship trust.
Okay.
So that's the vehicle that we developed to enable community folks to gain ownership of the properties that the guild works with them to develop. And so we have secured funding up front to develop the building, buy the site, and we'll turn it back over to basically allow for the community to invest. And it'll perform better than a savings account. So people are putting away money that becomes a tool for them to build an investment basically over the long term.
How do you choose who gets to stay in the properties?
Well, they're all set affordably at, I believe, around 60% AMI or so. And we also will have some Section 8 vouchers set aside in the project-based vouchers is what they call them. So a couple of the units will be specifically for folks at a lower income level. And we're also going to accept Section 8 vouchers overall. But we haven't, I don't think, developed yet what the sort of selection process or criteria will like. But the goal is specifically to house Black folks who live in the community and work in the community and are facing, tough circumstances, being able to find and secure housing in the communities that they were raised in and live in and have helped to shape.
So when you're looking for investors, who is the community investor that you are, or not you, but the guild is trying to activate?
Yeah, we're in the process of actually developing that now. So we're working with the Capitol View Neighborhood Association. So that's the primary base that we want to build out from. And a lot of it will involve tabling, going door to door, and educating folks around the process. We are planning and envisioning this really, comprehensive education process to train folks on investing, to train folks on financial acumen, on development. But it's in partnership specifically with the Capitol View Neighborhood Association. So the CST is open to anyone in the zip code. It's 30310 here in Atlanta. But we're specifically looking at Black folks, at long-time community members. They call them legacy residents here, as our specific group of folks that we want to get invested in the project, because we want folks to have an ownership stake, to have a path to some sort of wealth generation and equity generation.
So one of the things that you mentioned, and obviously what we care about because the name of this interview series is Black Co-ops Matter. So what prompted the decision for the guild to convert to a worker owner co-op? Yeah, I'm just really wondering.
I think it was always the goal of our founder, Nikishka, to become a worker-owned co-op. This is perhaps the most liberated work environment I've been a part of. And so, it's not just in doing real estate development that we're seeking to generate change, that we're seeking to liberate or decolonize or whatever you want to call it. It's also in the workspace, in the way that we exist as workers. And so I think that was a big part of it, was wanting it to be something that is a part of the solidarity economy, not just in terms of, again, how we develop, but also in terms of how we exist as an organization, that we're helping to generate an example of what type of economy we should be moving towards as employees and as owners of the business as well.
I feel like we throw out a lot of times we throw out solidarity economy. And I think we kind of assume everybody has an understanding of what we mean by that. So can you share what you mean when you say solidarity economy? What is that? What are you envisioning when you talk about the solidarity economy?
Yeah, there have been so many harms that have been carried out through capitalism in terms of exploitation, extraction, and it has a very particular express impact on Black people and Black communities. And so the solidarity economy is about really healing from those capitalist principles and capitalist ways of doing, to generate a economic picture and reality for folks that is healthier and actually gives people their due, that generates a world in which everybody has value, and that we can share in our value, and that folks are able to access resources as they need them. And so, yeah, it just seeks to really redress the really messed up circumstances that have been generated through decades and decades, centuries really, of capitalist practice, and to make sure that we're generating something that's more resilient, something that is looking at the environment and at communities, and working to specifically empower those communities to heal the environment, and again, generate alternative to the predominant ways of doing right now, which again involve a lot of exploitation, a lot of extraction from our communities.
So one of the things I find most interesting, especially about when we talk about worker owner co-ops versus, other co-ops like producer co-ops, consumer co-ops, is the idea of what I'm going to say, like more democratic governance within the organization. So what does your governance structure look like? Like, how do you guys collectively make decisions?
Yeah, that's a good question. And one of the aspects of the solidarity economy I should touch on is democracy, right? And really ensuring that that is practiced and it's shared, democratic, which, democracy seems to be fading everywhere we look. In terms of how it's practiced within our co-op, we're actually in a place right now, because we're in the stages of like converting right now, of generating shared agreements, of generating what our practice is. And I think, it'll look a lot like consensus-based decision making, where, we work together as a collective. There's 5 of us right now to generate and make decisions that work for all of us, and to be able to come to, through really thorough discussion, decisions around how we move forward, how we're governed, that work best for everybody. And there's no kind of like our structure as an organization is not, it's linear. It's not one person is the boss and the other people are the underlings. We all share in leadership aspects in the work. And so it's really about sharing the governance, sharing the responsibility, as opposed to, the traditional structure in this world is you have an ED and a nonprofit, or you have a CEO and a business, and that person has to bear all the burden and get all the good pay, and the rest of the people.
Yeah, very hierarchical. And
hierarchical, that's the word I was looking for.
But the pay is like,
right.
The hierarchy of the pay is there's a big gap in the middle.
Right, it's a big pyramid, right? And everybody at the bottom,
Yeah.
at the bottom getting less, and the person at the top, is getting the most.
I like that. It is a pyramid scheme. No?
Yeah, exactly. And so we're linear. It's everybody working side by side.
Got you. Horizontal.
Horizontal, right? We've all adopted titles that work best for what our skill sets are.
Yeah.
And can lean into that, and show up in a way that I think is really fair. Because the other part of it is that it's not fair, especially in the nonprofit world, to burden one person with the responsibility of making all the decisions, raising all the money, setting all the strategic decisions. That's not realistic. And so, we're wanting to turn to something that is realistic, where you really share responsibility. It's shared across all the staff. Everybody feels empowered to be a leader in the organization, feels safe to express their vision, their concerns, their needs in the workplace.
So if somebody's trying to start a worker-owned co-op, how do you think, what advice would you give them in terms of learning how to do that, how to operate in a horizontal, where everybody's really sharing this responsibility equally, because I feel like we've been taught, that top-down approach, that hierarchical way of doing things. How do you unlearn that and relearn what it means to cooperate?
Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot. It takes some intentionality. I mean, I think first and foremost, but the other thing I would say is that there's a lot of really great resources and organizations that are available to groups that do want to convert to a worker co-op or start a worker co-op. And so the Guild hasn't really gone it alone, but we've been really well resourced through fellowships, through connections with legal support, to understand all the fundamentals of how this works, how this functions, and how we eventually will convert. But back to the part around intentionality, it's just about being transparent, and about creating space where everyone feels comfortable to share. It's a lot of work, and I'm the last employee to join, so I actually haven't had to participate in some of the upfront work in terms of like the legal stuff, of sending in all of our documents, all of our tax stuff. Thank God. But it's a lot of work, and I would say that the most important thing is that you don't have to go it alone. That's the whole point, and that there are a ton of great resources, a number of them based in Oakland, but nationally, that are available to support workers who want to step through this, because the reality is that so much of our economy and just our society is structured around this very capitalist way of doing. And so it does require support to help people step out into a different space and way of doing things.
So I imagine, oh, sorry,
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry.
No worries.
There's a lizard, a gecko, a couple geckos crawling around, and I don't want them in my house.
Do they eat things?
No, they're probably vegetarian or vegan, but they're creepy looking. I'm urban still.
I love it. I know. I had to do some, you want to talk about some like decolonization of my mind. I did like a permaculture course, and that's what helped me to stop wanting to kill every bug that I saw, because I was like, I hate bugs. I hate them. They shouldn't exist. And then I really started to think about them like absolutely differently. I was like, oh my gosh, they feed the trees, they feed our earth, they feed our birds, like it was pretty hippie, but I love it. Anyway, so actually, well, a couple of things. I'm gonna kind of go back a little bit. I mean, well, I was sidelined to that, but before you were talking about having like a lot of support. I imagine y'all have to work with an attorney to help you through this process. What is that like? What is it like having to work with an attorney? What do you find important in the representation that that y'all choose to work with and help get things done?
Well, the guild, has both its own attorney, but we also had access to a pro bono attorney. And one of the amazing things is that, this is a big sort of law firm, national law firm, is that the reality is that sometimes those folks don't actually know a lot about how this works, because this isn't the norm. And so they're learning.
Note that.
Right. They're learning just as much as we are. And so there's space where we have to initially, early on, had to be corrective and say, actually, no, this is kind of how this would work and how we're thinking about this and what we need. So there's learning a lot of times that attorneys have to do, because this is just not what is commonly being taught in law school. It's not commonly what they're practicing in their law practice. And so I think it's a lot of kind of side-by-side learning that happens a lot of times with the legal folks. But obviously, this involves a lot of legal work, because, you have to charter, you have to get structured and that kind of thing. So I would say, yeah, that's kind of the piece, is that while you need a attorney legally for a lot of this, it makes as much sense that you, the staff and the workers, are gaining the skill set and the knowledge as well, because chances are you may know a little bit more about this than the folks who sort of had the legal stamp of approval.
Yeah, I think that's why, I didn't join, or I should say I joined Elizabeth L. Carter LLC, Esquire LLC, gosh, in the beginning of this year. And for me, it's pretty special because, Elizabeth created an organization that she wants completely focused on supporting the solidarity economy. And so much of that is education. So much of that is not only just, making sure that the people who are involved, that work in the firm, are on board with this vision of wanting to create a more cooperative world, especially in the Black community, of wanting to really push and grow cooperatives in the Black community. But it's educating ourselves, and it's, trying to educate other people about it. So I agree that, like, at the heart and center of this, of what, trying to create a shift deeper into this solidarity economy, it just takes a lot of education. But I definitely think that, like, that's, I'm just gonna say I'm proud of us, because I feel like don't feel like there's many people doing what we're trying to do. And like I always tell people, like, like Elizabeth, she's so funny. The first thing she has you do when you're training underneath her is read excerpts from from Collective Courage, which we all know is like the textbook. So she's like, boom, okay, and you're like, wait, I thought I was supposed to be learning securities law.
That's one of the most important parts about this, to me, is that there's a Black history of this, right? Like, these are things that our community specifically developed with and without legal resources because we had to, out of necessity, to address the ways that we were being left out in the capitalist system. And there's a really, as Jessica Gordon-Nimmerhart points out, there's a really great, rich history of Black cooperation historically. And, we know in that history, a lot of times that cooperation has been torn apart or under-resourced. But when you look back, this is what we do. This is what we've been doing in this country to persist. And so, it's an honor really to be a part of that lineage of work and a struggle to generate, a more fair and righteous economy, environment, world.
That was actually going to be one of my questions for you, because I want to know your personal story, briefly, about what sort of radicalized you in terms of saying like, I want to be a part of this cooperative movement. It's because we all know it's hard. It's hard when you have to, not that we're pioneers, because like you said, there's a rich history there, but it's not the norm and it's not taught in school. So, so I'm just wondering what brought you to this?
Well, I would say, talk about lineage. My mom is an activist organizer based in Baltimore. She worked mainly in her work in prisons, working with mostly Black men and some Black women to help politicize. It was described to the prison as conflict resolution, but really it was helping to politicize and counsel folks, who have been majorly excluded from our society. And so a lot of my interest in this just comes from her work, always in the case of her work in nonprofits. And so I was always oriented to social justice and originally had gone the nonprofit route myself. And what I realized is that the nonprofit route is really an extension of capitalism when it comes down to it. It's funded by the industrialists.
You said it. I didn't say that. You said it.
It's not to make light of amazing work that happens in the nonprofit world. I've been a part of some of that work, but the reality is that it's the funders of this are some of the most brute capitalists historically that we've ever seen in the world. And they are able to manage their control of the social justice sector in a lot of cases because of the reality that nonprofits are dependent on their funding, on foundation funding, which a lot of that's rooted in slavery. And so, I had joined up in the land trust movement, which land trusts are nonprofits, but again, another cooperative effort established by Black people in this country, and really wanted to exist in a workspace that was a bit more liberated than what any nonprofit can be, and I think have been able to find that in the cooperative and worker-owned space that we get to set the rules, we get to determine the work environment, the worker conditions. It goes kind of hand in hand with unions to an extent, except that unions don't necessarily generate ownership or control. They help to improve worker conditions, but in this case, it's like full ownership of what we're doing, of the product, of the environment that we're working under. And that really enticed me, really attracted me to the work, because I was kind of at wit's end with nonprofit America, just seeing the ways that the capitalist exploitation and extraction carries over into nonprofit industries. Wanted to be in a place that made me feel good, that made me feel that I could play a role in decision making, but didn't have to hold that alone, and could really do that hand in hand with other folks. There's, just in terms of my experience in the Guild, a lot of, you would say serendipity there. But it really just amazes me how like-minded we are in a lot of ways. And that certainly helps. The other part of it, I would say, is just the importance of healing. I had to heal from the experience in nonprofit America. And this is a space where there's a lot of intentionality around healing, around the importance of healing processes, healing ourselves so that we can show up fully, and obviously healing the world around us. Sorry, my apologies.
Sorry, absolutely. And no apologies, my allergies. First of all, I still remember, no, was it Georgia? No, I remember when I was visiting Duke back in the day, and I'm a California, I'm LA. So at that point, I don't even think I stepped out of LA. And I remember it was March, and I had to go visit because I was like visiting law schools. And I remember walking out and going, "Hey y'all, what is that? That's like, did it snow? It wasn't even cold enough to snow. That's just," and it was thick layer pollen. I had never seen something like that in my life. And like I was like, oh my God, that's pollen. And I couldn't breathe. I'm getting back on the airplane and like my ears were in pain. Anyway, that's my story. So I get it.
This time of year it coats everything in green. My porch is
I
like
know,
green.
and especially if you're not used to it, if you're urban, as you say, you're
It's
like
right.
dying. Well, I didn't want, thank you so much. I realize what time it is. But I just want to say thank you. This was really just helpful. I think we're doing this interview series, like I said, like we want to create education, but not even just for, outwardly, it's like inwardly. Like I'm learning from talking to people, especially because one of the things that you just mentioned, a couple of things that and then I'll wrap it up, is that your mom was doing conflict resolution. And I started thinking about how popular restorative justice is right now. And so you kind of made me think like, hey, maybe I need to know more about that. Like we always kind of talk about the fact that right now, like in LAUSD, which is LA Unified School District, they're doing a lot of focus on restorative justice. And I remember somebody told, because my sister still works in that district, and my dad used to work in that district, and they were like, oh, you're Nardi Deadman's daughter, right? Man, he's the OG restorative justice. I was like, yeah, my dad was doing restorative justice before it was a thing.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I could say the same about my mom before the coin was the term was coined,
Right, exactly. So I thought that was really cool that you mentioned that about your mom, and just how important, like it goes into the whole healing, like healing, conflict resolution, literally how we relate to one another, and how much work has to be done. And when we talk about cooperation, I mean, that's what it boils down to, how we relate to each other, changing those dynamics. And then when you said like the nonprofit world really is an extension of capitalism, it really harkened to me that not only in how like it is funded, and that like you said, it really is like funded by the, I'm going to say, surplus of exploitation, right? And FYI, for anybody who's interested, a good book is called Winners Take All. That's a great book by Anand Haridas. I usually say it right. I'm not saying it right now. And I think it really explains how people, the rich, use the foundations to manipulate and control through the use of nonprofits and giving. But also that when we talk about law and we talk about structure, and when we talk about institutionalized like racism or discrimination, or or the institutionalization of isms, and exploitation, is it really is like when you look at the laws around how like nonprofits are structured, right? And that's why when you're trying to create a cooperative, all of a sudden you're like, like you said, the lawyers are like, hands up, what, you guys want to create a co-op? We don't know what to do with this. And that's because it's literally ingrained in these institutions, in the law itself. So that's what we mean when we talk about institutional or systemic like isms.
That's right. Yeah, it's absolutely embedded in the law, and we're having to kind of take apart the wires from that system, and that's the healing component. It's, for lack of better terminology here, it's like people have to know that they're not crazy, right? That the world that they see around them, other people see. And when you find those folks who see the world like you do, then you can figure out how to really change it. It's an absurd thing to work at a nonprofit that would use the word solidarity, but wouldn't allow the workers to talk about unionization. That's kind of the realm, right?
Yeah, it's I think like, you said it. You said it.
For our funders. So guaranteeing you your labor doesn't work well for our funders. We need to be able to fire you at will, that kind of thing. Is the world that we inherit when we just accept the way things are. And it's, the time is on us to really be pushing on the change to really get at the root causes of these systems, a lot of which is embedded in law.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's so important that more lawyers are becoming intentional about wanting to serve the solidarity economy, because it's hard work. It's about stepping away from how you've, what you spent 3 years in law school learning, and then, et cetera, et cetera. So, all right. Thank you, Zach. I really appreciate you. Is there any last words you want to say that you think people should know about cooperatives and Black cooperatives?
We got a long, proud history of it. And a lot of it has been underground. A lot of it has been above ground. And I'm just proud to be a part of it, and really thankful that you're taking on this work, because we need all the support we can get to help more of our folks, because we need to start owning our labor. We need to start owning the products we produce. And this is a great first step to do it in a way that's liberated, that shares the wealth, and just honored to be a part of the movement alongside folks like you.
Appreciate you. Okay, well, have a wonderful day. Appreciate
Great.
everything.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.